In the past couple of days, I played We Must Tell the Emperor, the most recent solitaire game published by Victory Point Games. And I had very mixed feelings about it. I didn't find anything particularly wrong about it. However, I couldn't find enough to really keep me going and make me intrigued in the game. I was under the impression that I could have had more options than the one that the game was giving me, and that might have made things more fun. Also, I kind of felt that the game was overall too long because the initial phases that are much easier than the later ones, they last quite a bit, so by the time I was in the end, I was almost like exhausted. That was instead when I wanted to concentrate my efforts and when I was expecting most of the fun to be. So I would have liked a little more flexibility there. Maybe the option of playing only the late part of the war or maybe only the early one. Just more flexibility. So I also knew that there was an expansion that's scheduled to come out, so I was curious about that. And the developer of the game has been very nice. He has sent me a file with the preliminary version of that expansion. I printed it, I built it, and I played it. And now we're gonna see if that changed or not my perception of the game. In the expansion, you find 2 pages of scenarios with different ways that the game can be played. 2 pages of new rules, both to use the new components and just to add new things to the old game. You have a bunch of cards from the 3 decks, the yellow, the light blue, and the gray, that you're going to add to the regular deck. Actually, you even have 4 cards of a new type, the End of War cards, that will be played in the end, and you have a couple of markers just to keep track of new things happening. A new challenge that the expansion brings you is the card Soviet Union Declares War. It's a card that must be played towards the end of the game at 4 cards from the end or less, but when you flip it, then you bring in a brand new front, the Soviet front, which is, as you can see, pretty strong, and what's much worse is that they enter the game right there, in the box number 1 of the Chinese track. So it's towards the end of the game, you think, okay, I'm gonna make it, and then all of a sudden you have that extra enemy, that extra thing to worry about, and that extra challenge. To give you an example of a new card, this one puts back into the game the Dutch Borneo front that you have to push to Java at the beginning of the game to be able to receive your oil supply. So when you flip the card, this is what happens. Put the marker back to the front side and put it there. It is a new thing, of course, because then you have to find the front again and put them back there to get your oil, but as you can see, it's a pretty weak front, so unless there's something that I'm not seeing, it's pretty easy to push them back there, and I don't think that this adds much to the general strategy. A new rule that you find in the expansion is the one about invasion preparation. Now, if both American fronts reach their number 1 box and they're there at the end of a turn, you have to flip your fortification mark to this side. There's a number 4 there, and then you have to roll a die. If you roll more than 4, then nothing happens, you just get your fortifications back. If you roll 4 or less, then 2 terrible penalties happen. The first one, no banzai attacks are available, which is bad enough, but the worst one is that your fortifications are not available. So now your enemies will be able to reach Japan without nobody stopping them. And that, to get your fortifications back, what you have to do is to push both American fronts far from their number 1 box, both of them, not just one. And it's an extremely hard thing to do. Now, because of this section of the map does play differently from others. Because, for example, you will not be worried about this combination of fronts as much as you will be about this one, because the previous one does not attack your fortifications and this one does. So now different tracks around here will work differently, and that of course makes things more interesting. When I was playing the original game, sometimes I thought that giving more options to the player might have made things more fun. Also, I was occasionally troubled by the impression that the resources tracks worked in a way that was a little too similar to the army tracks. Now, both issues have been elegantly resolved in the expansion with the introduction of the withdrawal rule. What happens here is that now once per turn you have the option of spending one action and placing one of those markers on the Army Navy track starting from the highest number. And then when you do that, you don't have to roll to get new Army Navies. All you do is you move the thing automatically. What you're doing is that you're withdrawing troops from China. Next turn I can spend another action, another marker, and I get another one for free, and for sure I don't have to chance it. All this is good, but the catch is that these markers, once you place them there, you cannot remove them. They effectively shorten the length of your track. In this case, I got 3 for free, which was awesome, but now my Army Navy track is long only 3, and I will never be able to have more than 3 at the same time. So it does give me more options, because now I have to think whether or not I want to place those dangerous markers for an immediate reward. And also because of this track here works in a completely different way from anything else on the board. And that to me does enrich the general experience of the game. Something else that you find in the expansion is this mini deck of 4 end-of-war cards. As you can see from the number of fronts that advance and the fact that you keep losing resources on most cards, well, you can see that these cards are extremely challenging, extremely hard to beat. So the game is already hard enough when you get towards the end and your empire usually is already falling apart. Well, if you're crazy enough and you think that's not enough of a challenge, then you will have a lot of fun adding these 4 cards. I also like this card here because it poses a specific challenge. When you get here, you have to add together the number of resources you have and the number of kamikaze markers you have saved up to that point. Then you roll a die and you need to roll less than that number. So I like the fact that when you know this card is coming, you have to start planning in advance on building up resources and saving your kamikaze so that you can go through this check. So I like the fact that it affects your strategy starting from at least a couple of turns in advance. One of the biggest troubles that I had with the original game is how the first 2 decks play much more easily than the last one, which is really the challenging one. Sometimes I would lose toward the end of the game and I would feel discouraged by the idea of playing again because I had to go through that long process of beating the yellow and the light blue deck before I got to what I was really interested in. So now, luckily enough, in the expansion I have this scenario book that allows me much more flexibility. For example, if I want, now I can play just the early war scenario. So I only use the yellow deck, and in that case probably it will be easy to survive until the end, so defeat or victory will not be based on whether I arrive to the end of the deck or not, but on the points that I score. Or if I want, I can just play with the light blue deck, with the mid-war scenario, and I have a setup where the front's already closer to Japan and some of the resources are already being used up. And here at the end of the light blue deck, I can decide if I want to keep playing until the end of the war, or if I want to stop there. And again, in that case, I have a table that tells me if I lost or won based on points rather than on arriving to the last card. But what I really like, the best thing definitely to me, is that now I can play the great deck, the challenging deck, with all sort of things happening just starting from there. I can play the late war scenario only, and then things are very hard because the enemies are very close, not many resources are left, and as you can see, there isn't a condition that you can win using points, because at that point really survival is hard enough, and that is what will decide whether you win or not. You even have the option of playing a mini game just using the 4 end of war cards that I showed you before. It was extremely hard, extremely challenging cards. Also, the setup is extremely challenging. So you only have 4 cards, and that's a game that will last around 2 or 3 minutes if you're lucky and you win. Most likely it will last between 20 and 30 seconds because you flip the first cards and you are defeated right there. So is it a scenario that I'll be playing for a long time, 100 times? I don't think so, but is the scenario that for something that lasts less than 2 minutes is fun and crazy enough to be intriguing? Well, yeah, I would say it is. The expansion really fulfilled the 2 wishes that I had about this game. The first one is that I wanted to have more options, more things to do and to consider. And now I do have those. I have more enemies that are trying to attack me, more different types of tasks that I have to perform, things to worry about. It just gives so much more variety. True, many of those options are still situational. They come from one card, and another card takes them away after a while. So it is still a lot of time, it's not the entire game. However, you have those and you add them to the ones that you already had before. It is slots of time one after the other, but there are many, so there's always something going on, and that to me keeps the flow of the game much more interesting. The other wish that I had was the possibility of jumping straight into the action. And now that I have that option with the setup, the late war setup, that to me made all the difference in the world about this game. Now I can play a game in 10-20 minutes, starting from the gray late war deck, and immediately I'm surrounded by enemies and things are happening. Because also, that is the part of the game where you have most options available. That's when the kamikaze markers become available, the withdrawal option is available, the Soviets are coming, you know that check about resources and kamikaze markers is coming up, the enemies are closer to Japan, so the invasion preparation becomes an issue. It is also where you have most things to do. And the pressure is strong, so it is really where things get interesting and nail-biting at times. Interestingly enough, just because the game is immediately engaging, I was dragged into the light deck, the gray deck immediately. Then I played it for a while and the game grew on me overall, and now I'm able to go back and play the yellow deck or the light blue deck only, and I enjoy them much more as a light diversion from the other deck. As it often happens, now that I don't have to play them, I feel more interested by them and I want to play them. The bottom line is that if you enjoy the original game, I think you're really going to enjoy the expansion even more. If you had negative or mixed feelings about the game like I had, well, I would recommend that you try the expansion before you put the game on your for-trade list, because playing the expansion may really make the difference between you enjoying the game in the future and you trading it away for a copy of Go Fish. I know that at least that is what the expansion did for me.